One-turn meal recipes with Exnick. Hello viewers, welcome again. Thank you very much for your continued support. I like all your comments and opinions, and we are going to have two new recipes for one-turn meal and also a surprise at the end with another recipe that is not one turn, but I think you are going to like it. So remember, here we are going to try to get rid of all the cards of the opponent's library in a single turn by employing normal cards, normal decks, and we don't want to be relying in our luck. In previous iteration of this idea, the viewers left nice comments and ideas. Someday I want to try those, but before that I just wanted to show some recordings I made some time ago, but I couldn't find the time to edit this. And also in general, I want to mention that doing this is kind of interesting against the AI. I don't suggest you play these decks against a human opponent unless you are very angry at him and you have enough free time to try this. Also, notably, many cards are very helpful, not directly to the milling idea, but to find the cards. So thank you Temillo's Journal, thank you the Portal, thank you the Inventors Fair, and all the cards that can tutor something from the library are a great help here. So well, I'm going to try to cast this. I'm just watching the recordings, but I don't actually have anything prepared. I did record some audio back then, but then I noticed that the games were excessively long and decided to speed up most of the not so interesting aspect of the games against the AI. Sometimes you can find yourself struggling a little bit. The decks of the AI are very well assembled. But let's move on to our first recipe for this chapter. It's called the Evangel Salad. It's based on the Sphinx's tutelage, so a bit of not too original, but today we're going to try to activate the Oracle's Evangel ability to kill lots of our own creatures, and then for each one we spawn Eldrazi Horror as a 3/2 colorless token. And then we also want to have Elemental Bond, which is going to trigger one draw one draw for each creature that enters the battlefield with power 3 or more, and of course all our tokens are going to count for it. So the deck is straightforward, as many of the Sphinx's decks are, but here remember that since we want to do the milling in one go, the Sphinx, we want to most likely play the Sphinx in the same turn that we are going to do everything here. So we are going to be helped with our purpose using the Anointed Procession. Also notice that the Oracle's Evangel has to tap to activate the ability. Therefore we must have the Oracle's Evangel on the board from the previous turn, or somehow give him haste. In this deck and in this game I did not do that. It's doable, but here I decided to go with this. Just let's see what can we do here. Now notice the following. If in this game we have 27 cards remaining in our library, and if we are going to be drawing cards in order to mill the opponent, we run the risk of milling ourselves. We also lose the game if we draw too many cards. We are running Commit to Memory in case we need to recover the cards from our graveyard, and even the opponent's card we don't mind, since we are going to be able to mill the opponent fully if we succeed with our plan. In this case, I had 4 cards in the graveyard currently, so I got a bit impatient and decided to go for the milling in this very same turn by searching for an additional Sphinx's tutelage. Not really required, but this was not the first game I tried with this. I did some mistakes, you can imagine which kind of mistakes, and failed in the first attempts of this milling tactic. So I have a question for you. So given that we have 2 Sphinxes, now 2 anointed possessions, and also 2 elemental bonds, how many creatures should I sacrifice to mill the opponent? In this game, how many additional creatures must be sacrificed alongside Emrakul's Evangel to completely mill the opponent, but not yourself? A. 9, B. 7, C. 0, D. 2. You have to take into account, when you sacrifice Emrakul's Evangel, an additional creature, an Eldrazi Horror, a 3/2 colorless token, it's going to be summoned for you. Is it 9? And yes, the answer was 2 more creatures besides the Emrakul's Evangel. Let's see what happens in the game. So, because we have 2 anointed possessions in play, instead of having 1 token out of the Emrakul's Evangel for each creature that has died, we received 4 of them. There are 4 creatures entering the battlefield with power 3, and we have 2 elemental bonds. So for each of those creatures that we killed, we are going to be drawing 8 cards. And in this game, we cannot kill an additional creature, since we will be drawing 8 more cards that could cause us to lose the game instead of the opponent, since we self-deck, and that's not pretty to do. And an option to avoid these situations in this type of deck is to run some sort of way to force the opponent to draw, instead of just waiting for his next draw step, and therefore you prevent the losing the game. But as we see, I was actually a bit tired of the deck here and decided to just let's see other recipes. We now have the talent soup. It's a meal recipe based on the talent of the telepath. It's a sorcery that mills for 7 cards from the top of the opponent's library. So we have to activate it 9 times at the very least, and we overmill a little bit, that we don't care. So we need to cast this spell multiple times, or we can also use some copies, and of course we are going to be using some graveyard fetch to play it. One of the most difficult or challenging aspects of doing this recipe is to gather enough mana to do this. Of course, we could go ahead and try the Tamillo's emblem also, but I think that we already have done that, and there are many other opportunities. So we are going to be running Cultivator's Caravan and Seer's Lantern and the Pyramid, and these artifacts provide us with additional mana for us besides our lands, of course. And then we have these cards that untap our guys. Sahili Rai also can make a duplicate of one of our mana providers, and also we run Dramatic Reversal that untaps all of our permanents. And Baral, Chief of the Compliance, of course, a key card for us, since it makes us able to play anything for a much reduced cost. And we then want to copy our talent of the telepath using cards such as Gaze Blast or Insidious Will, so we can benefit from those cards and get to the 9. And for the graveyard fetch, we can use, for instance, Torrential Gearhulk, Scribe of the Mindful. We have to pay mana and sacrifice the card and tap. And the most interesting aspect here would be Ulamog's Reclaimer, combined with the Watchers of the Dead. So when Ulamog's Reclaimer enters the battlefield, we can fetch an instant or sorcery from the graveyard, and we also run some flicker spells, and that means that we can have an endless stream of sorceries and so on and so on. So here the bottleneck could be the mana, of course, but after doing this recording I noticed that I could have gone for infinite mana, but I'm going to leave that for another type of deck, because if you have infinite mana, milling the opponent is probably not the most interesting thing you can do. And here we have a route to do that. Also, the Ulamog's Reclaimer requires for the opponent to have some cards in the exile zone, and that's the reason that it makes this infinite plan a bit more tricky. But on the other hand, it can be interesting if we add some black cards, but I'm just talking about something else. So here, let's go back to what's going on here. We already are casting our first 3 copies of the talent of the telepath, and now we use some of our graveyard fetch to fetch. Well, we could fetch the talent itself, but here I went for the Insidious Will, so we can copy at instant speed the talent of the telepath. Not really, doesn't make much of a difference here, but just for fun. Then Gaze Blast 2. The Gaze Blast has the habit of self-exiling from the graveyard, but what are you going to do? Also, I found some spells to cast from the opponent's deck, but here the idea is to not use those spells to kill the opponent. Also to mention that instead of the talent of the telepath, we could use some other spells to mill the opponent, but I don't know. I think it's possible. It's going to look pretty similar to this, so I don't think it's worthy to do another version of this with other variations, but you get the gist of how to do it. Then here, finally, we keep playing, and I did some mistakes in the mana stage of the deck. Instead of making sure I could have enough mana to play everything, I think I could have do it better, but anyways, here we see finally I end up with my 2 cards in my hand, and that's pretty cool. And for all of you, we have a bonus recipe. It's a pseudo one-turn meal based on Ulamog. I call this the Ulamog fondue because it's very cheesy. And what to do here, Ulamog just needs to attack 3 times in the same turn, and then we have milled the opponent for 60 cards. Actually, the cards don't even go to the graveyard or cemetery, they are all exiled. One of the dangers of doing this plan is that Ulamog happens to also be a very massive creature that could kill the opponent, and then we have to be a bit careful to prevent that, because if we want to mill, we don't want to kill. Remember that, kids. Then how to get to play Ulamog easily here. Ulamog costs us 10 mana, so we don't want to pay such an expensive cost for an absurd creature. In this game I used the prince or Mendahal to stay alive. Pretty handy, and after this guy is out, I just have to wait until I find the pieces of the combo. The combination is based on necromantic summons to pull out Yulamok from the graveyard and then grant him haste with the haunted clock. So we have our first attack in the sure sink. Then we use the water bale to gain an additional turn, and the Insidious Will to copy the part of the water bale to get yet another turn. So in reality, this recipe is taking 3 turns instead of just 1, but we are not giving the chance for the opponent to do anything in between. And of course, if we had access to one of the most cool cards types in Magic, we could do this differently, but those cards are not present in Magic Duels. Well, we have plenty of cards to make. There are decks for ages with the cards that we already have here. Of course, not all of those decks are going to be interesting, but here we are just going to swing with Yulamog, and notice that I'm running the fog here just in case the AI decides not to block Yulamog, or if he or she or it runs out of blockers. We want to actually mill the opponent, not kill, so we run fog to prevent our own Yulamog from doing damage and just milling the opponent. Of course, Yulamog himself is pretty hard to kill. A clever opponent could exile our Yulamog or force us to sacrifice it, but if you run Yulamog, you deserve for all of those things to happen to you, so don't complain. Yulamog is way too powerful. It should cost much more mana to play Yulamog. So I hope you have enjoyed this chapter of the recipes, and we're going to meet sometime in the future our final chapter with another interesting combinations. Until then, sayonara!